The maitre d's hand trembled as he slid the leather portfolio across the white tablecloth toward me. $23 million. That's what it took to wipe the smirk off my daughter's face and turn her dinner guests into statues. The same tablecloth where 3 hours earlier she'd laughed and told them her poor old dad couldn't even afford to split the check. Now I owned every thread of it, every crystal glass, every embarrassed silence hanging in the air like expensive perfume. She was staring at me with eyes I didn't recognize anymore, and I realized that sometimes the most expensive things in life aren't measured in money at all. My name is Frank Morrison, and I'm 72 years old. Tonight, I became the most expensive mistake my daughter ever made. The invitation came on cream-colored paper with gold edges. Sarah's engagement party, black tie, Chez Laurent downtown. RSVP required. I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, coffee growing cold in my hand, reading those elegant letters for the third time. 47 years I'd been Sarah's father, put her through Princeton, then Harvard Law, writing checks that made my savings account weep. And now I needed a formal invitation to celebrate her engagement. You going to that fancy thing? My neighbor Pete leaned against the back fence, coffee mug in hand. Seems like it. When's the last time you wore a tux? Your daughter's wedding, 2018. Pete took a long drag of his cigarette. She invite any of your old crew? The question hit exactly where he'd aimed it. Don't think construction workers were on the guest list. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Dad, please try to dress appropriately. It's a very upscale venue. Maybe rent something. 47 years and she was worried I'd embarrass her by existing. I typed back, I'll manage. Her response came immediately. Also, James's parents will be there. They're very sophisticated. Just be yourself, but maybe the version of yourself that went to college. I never went to college. Sarah knew this. I'd started working construction the day after high school graduation because her mother was pregnant and we needed health insurance. The rest of the week passed in preparation that felt like armor. At the men's warehouse, a kid who couldn't have been older than 25 looked me up and down like damaged goods. Special occasion? He asked. My daughter's engagement party. What we could do, apparently, was make me look like a waiter. The tux fit fine, but in the three-way mirror, I looked like someone wearing a costume. Saturday evening came too fast. Chez Laurent sat on the top floor of a glass tower, the elevator ride to the 40th floor probably costing more in electricity than I used to make in a day. The maitre d' greeted me with professional warmth. Good evening, sir. Name for the reservation? Morrison. I'm with the Hammond party. The dining room was a study in understated wealth. Crystal chandeliers, white linen, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that probably added 20% to every bill. I spotted Sarah immediately. She stood near the far window, wine glass in hand, laughing at something a man in a navy suit had said. James had the look of someone who'd never worried about money. Clean shave, perfect teeth, the kind of confidence that comes from generations of privilege. Sarah saw me approaching and her smile flickered. Just for a second. Dad! She moved toward me, arms extended for a hug. That felt rehearsed. You made it. Wouldn't miss it. I squeezed her hand, noting the diamond that probably cost more than my truck. Congratulations, sweetheart. James extended a hand with the kind of firm grip they probably taught in business school. Mr. Morrison, pleasure to meet you. What line of work are you in? Construction, Morrison and Sons. I paused. Well, just Morrison now. Never had any sons. Sarah's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. In that pause, I heard everything she'd never said about my work, my world, my place in her new life. Construction, James repeated, testing the word. That's honest work. The phrase hung in the air like a judgment wrapped in politeness. The evening proceeded with surgical precision. I sat at the family table, surrounded by people who spoke in shorthand from shared experiences I'd never had. Private schools, European vacations, trust funds. Sarah was in her element, moving between conversations like a conductor, managing an orchestra. This was her world now, and watching her navigate it, I felt pride mixed with the sharp ache of loss. Then came the moment that changed everything. We were between courses when James's father leaned back with the satisfaction of someone who'd had exactly the right amount to drink. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying across the table, "you simply must tell us about your father's restaurant recommendation. Where does your family usually dine?" The question was innocent enough, but it landed like a depth charge. I watched Sarah's face cycle through several expressions before settling on panic. "We don't really," she started, then stopped. That's when I saw it. The exact moment my daughter decided who she wanted to be. Sarah laughed. A bright, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you know how it is. Dad's more of a simple tastes kind of guy." James's father had the look of a man who'd found something interesting to poke at. "Simple tastes?" Sarah's cheeks flushed pink. "I just mean, well, Dad's not really..." She gestured vaguely at the crystal and silver. "This isn't exactly his usual scene." James's father nodded with understanding that felt like sympathy. Different worlds. That's when Sarah made her choice. "Honestly?" She lowered her voice just enough to seem conspiratorial while ensuring everyone could still hear. "Dad could barely afford to split a check at Applebee's, let alone somewhere like this." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were untrue, but because of the shame in her voice, the relief on her face at having finally said what she'd been thinking all evening. I was her embarrassment, her burden, her secret. The table fell silent except for the gentle clink of silverware. I felt 8 pairs of eyes weighing me, calculating my worth, and finding me appropriately wanting. James's mother made a soft "oh" sound that somehow contained both pity and satisfaction. Well, we've all been there. "No," I thought. "No, you haven't." I looked at my daughter and realized I was staring at a stranger. Somewhere between Princeton and Harvard, I'd lost her. Or maybe she'd lost me. I set down my fork with deliberate care. "Excuse me, I need to make a phone call." I walked toward the restroom hallway, feeling their collective gaze. In the marble bathroom, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in 6 months. "Frank? Jesus, what time is it?" "Evening, Marcus. Sorry to call so late." Marcus Chen had been my business partner for 30 years before I bought him out. He'd gone on to start an investment firm that catered to people who'd made their money with their hands. "What's going on?" "I need you to run some numbers. That portfolio you set up for me? How much is it worth right now?" A pause, then fingers on a keyboard. "Just over 47 million. The number hit me like a slap. I'd known it was substantial, but hearing it out loud, standing in a bathroom that cost more to renovate than most people's houses, the absurdity was staggering. "How much can I access immediately?" "Immediately? Like tonight immediately? Monday morning immediately. Probably 35-40 million. "Frank, what the hell is going on?" Through the door I could hear my daughter's laugh, that same bright, brittle sound that had cut through me like a blade. "I might want to make a purchase. What kind of purchase requires $40 million? "The kind that teaches lessons." I hung up and returned to the table. The conversation had moved on, but I barely heard it. I was thinking about the mathematics of love and money and the price of teaching someone who you really are. As the evening wound down, Sarah hugged me goodbye at the elevator. "Thanks for coming, Dad. I know this isn't really your thing." "No," I said quietly. "I guess it isn't." I drove home through empty streets, past construction sites where I'd spent most of my life, my decision crystallizing with every mile. Monday morning I was going to buy that restaurant, and then I was going to teach my daughter exactly who her father really was. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of October day that reminds you winter's coming whether you're ready or not. I was up before dawn, same as I'd been for 50 years, but instead of reaching for work boots and a thermos of coffee, I put on my best suit and made a phone call that would change everything. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Frank, please tell me you've come to your senses. Good morning to you too." I stood at my kitchen window, watching the neighbor's cat stalk something in the frost-covered grass. "You have those papers ready?" "I have them ready. I also have a headache and about 12 hours of sleep debt because I spent all Sunday making sure you wouldn't do something catastrophically stupid with $47 million. Only need about half that." "Only," Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Frank, in 30 years of friendship, you've never made an impulsive financial decision. You researched buying a lawnmower for 3 weeks. Now, you want to drop $23 million on what? A restaurant? Because your daughter hurt your feelings? I set my coffee mug down harder than necessary. My daughter told a room full of strangers that her father was too poor to split a check at Applebee's. So buy her a car. Hell, buy her a house. Don't buy the place where it happened. But Marcus didn't understand. This wasn't about money. This was about respect. About the difference between a man who worked with his hands and a man who was poor. About teaching my daughter that those weren't the same thing. The papers, Marcus, he sighed. My office, 9 a.m. But I'm bringing my lawyer, and he's going to make you sign 17 different documents saying this isn't my fault when your daughter never speaks to you again. By 8:30, I was sitting in downtown traffic, watching. People in expensive suits hurried toward buildings made of glass and steel. My truck, a 2019 Ford F-150, paid for in cash, looked out of place among the BMWs and Mercedes. But I'd stopped caring about fitting in somewhere around 3 a.m. Sunday night. Marcus's office occupied the 20th floor of a building I'd helped frame back in 2003. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built the skeleton. Now I was here to make use of what grew around it. Frank. Marcus stood when I entered his office, extending a hand like we were meeting for the first time. You look like hell. Feel worse. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, noting the view of the city that sprawled below us. You make the calls? I made the calls. He slid a folder across the desk. Chez Laurent is owned by Laurent Holdings, LLC. Private company, 3 partners. They've been hemorrhaging money since the pandemic. High overhead, limited seating, too much debt service on their lease. They interested? They're salivating. Problem is, they want $28 million for the business, equipment, and remaining lease. I got them down to 23, but Frank, he leaned forward. This is insane. You could buy 10 restaurants for that money. Better restaurants. I don't want 10 restaurants. I want that one. Marcus's lawyer, a thin man named Davidson, who looked like he'd been born wearing a suit, cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, I have to advise you that restaurant ownership is among the riskiest investments possible. The failure rate. How long to close? Davidson blinked. Excuse me? How long to close the deal? I want to own it by Friday. That's impossible. Due diligence alone requires... I'll waive due diligence. Cash purchase as is. Marcus and Davidson exchanged looks. Frank, Marcus said slowly, you can't waive due diligence on a $23 million purchase. Watch me. For the next 2 hours, we fought through paperwork that would have made a tax attorney weep. Davidson kept muttering about liability and precedent while Marcus ran numbers that made less sense the longer I stared at them. But by 11 a.m., we had a framework. By noon, we had an offer. By 2 p.m., Laurent Holdings had accepted. The call came while I was sitting in my truck in a McDonald's parking lot, eating a Big Mac that cost me $4 and thinking about wine that cost $200. They said yes. Marcus's voice was flat. 23 million. Cash. Closing. Friday at 10 a.m. Good. Frank, please. Think about this. What are you going to do with a restaurant? I looked out at the traffic, at people going about their Monday afternoon business, completely unaware that a 72-year-old construction worker was about to become one of the city's restaurant owners. I'm going to invite my daughter to dinner. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. You're going to buy a restaurant to invite your daughter to dinner? I'm going to buy the restaurant where she told people I was poor. Then I'm going to invite her and her fiancé and his parents back for a meal. On the house. And then what? I hadn't thought that far ahead. Then we'll see. Wednesday afternoon, I drove back to Chez Laurent. In daylight, the building looked different. Older, more tired, the kind of place that relied on evening lighting and expensive wine to hide the wear around the edges. The maitre d' who'd greeted me Saturday night was behind the host stand, polishing silverware with the kind of attention that suggested he had nothing better to do. Good afternoon, he said, looking up. May I help you? Antoine, right? We spoke on the phone Saturday night. Recognition flickered across his face. Oh, yes, sir. You were asking about purchasing? I'm Frank Morrison. I'll be the new owner as of Friday. Antoine's hand went still on the silver fork he'd been polishing. New owner? That's right. Thought I'd stop by and take a look around. You mind? He set down the fork with the careful precision of a man who'd just realized his world had shifted. Of course, sir. Right this way. The tour took 20 minutes. Kitchen that was cleaner than most hospital operating rooms. Wine cellar that contained bottles worth more than cars. Dining room that looked exactly as I remembered. Elegant, expensive, intimidating. How long have you worked here, Antoine? 12 years, sir. You like it? He paused, considering the question with the weight it deserved. It's good work. Honest work. Honest work. There was that phrase again. I'm not planning to change much, I said. Good staff, good food, good service. Only thing I want different is the attitude, sir. This place has a way of making people feel small. That's going to stop. Antoine nodded slowly. I understand, sir. Thursday evening I called Sarah. She answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. Hi, Dad. What's up? Wanted to invite you and James to dinner Saturday? I don't know, Dad. We're pretty busy with wedding planning and James has this work thing. Chez Laurent. 8 o'clock. My treat. The silence was immediate and complete. When she spoke again, her voice was careful. Dad, we talked about this. That place is really expensive. I can handle it. It's not about handling it. It's about being practical. There are plenty of nice places that aren't so what? Another pause. So pretentious. The psycher. Word hung between us like a challenge. Maybe. But I'd like to take you there anyway. You and James. And his parents, if they're available. Dad. It's important to me, Sarah. After Saturday night, I realized I don't know enough about your world. I'd like to try. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her working through the implications. Her father, who couldn't afford to split a check, wanting to take 5 people to the most expensive restaurant in the city. Are you sure? I'm sure. Okay. Her voice was small. I'll ask James. Good. 8 o'clock Saturday. Tell them to expect the Morrison party. I hung up before she could change her mind, then sat in my empty house, thinking about the difference between expensive and pretentious, between honest work and easy money, between the man my daughter thought I was and the man I'd always been. Friday morning, I signed papers that transferred ownership of Chez Laurent from Laurent Holdings to Morrison Hospitality, LLC, the seller's attorney, a woman who looked like she'd been handling million-dollar deals since birth, shook my hand with professional warmth. Congratulations, Mr. Morrison. You're now the proud owner of one of the city's finest dining establishments. Thank you, I said, meaning it. Marcus drove me back to the restaurant afterward, neither of us saying much. When we pulled up to the curb, he finally spoke. You know there's no going back from this, right? Win or lose, everything changes Saturday night. I looked up at the building, my building now, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not quite peace, but close to it. Good, I said. Maybe it's time. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn light that makes everything look like a movie set. I stood in my bedroom, staring at 3 different ties laid out on the bed like evidence in a case I wasn't sure I wanted to win. The black one was safe, conservative, the kind of tie a man wears when he doesn't want to be noticed. The red one was bold, confident, the kind of tie a man wears when he owns the restaurant. The blue one split the difference, professional but not flashy. The kind of tie a man wears when he's about to change his daughter's life forever. I went with the red. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Just confirming tonight, 8 p.m. James's parents are excited to see you again. I stared at the message, wondering what version of excited she meant. The kind that comes from genuine interest, or the kind that comes from watching a car wreck in slow motion. I typed back, looking forward to it. It wasn't a lie. I was looking forward to it, the same way a man looks forward to jumping out of an airplane, terrified and exhilarated and completely committed to the fall. By 6 o'clock, I was at Chez Laurent, standing in the kitchen while Antoine briefed the evening staff. 23 people on duty, 8 servers, 4 bussers, 3 bartenders, 2 hosts, 4 kitchen staff, and 2, managers. All of them looking at me like I was either their salvation or their doom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Antoine said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from 12 years of managing controlled chaos, "I'd like you to meet Frank Morrison, our new owner." A murmur rippled through the group. I caught fragments. "Construction guy? Bought the whole place? How much money does he have?" I stepped forward, suddenly aware that I was older than most of their fathers, and probably dressed better than I'd ever been in my life. "Evening, everyone. I know this is sudden, and I know you've got questions. Here's what I can tell you. Nothing changes tonight. You do the job you've always done, the way you've always done it. The only difference is who signs your paychecks." A young server, couldn't have been older than 25, raised her hand tentatively. "Sir, are you planning to change things? The menu, the prices, the way we do service?" "Not tonight. Tonight we run the restaurant exactly like we always have. Tomorrow we'll talk about what stays and what goes." She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. 23 people whose livelihoods now depended on decisions I hadn't even made yet. "One more thing," I said. "Table 12, 8 o'clock reservation under Morrison. That's my daughter and her fiancé. Treat them like any other guests. Professional, courteous, but nothing special. They don't know I own this place yet." Antoine's eyebrows rose, slightly. "They don't know, sir. They will." At 7:30, I positioned myself at the bar where I could see the entrance but wouldn't be immediately visible to arriving guests. The bartender, a woman named Clara with silver hair and hands that moved like poetry, set a glass of water in front of me without being asked. "Nervous?" she asked quietly. "Terrified." She smiled. "Good. Means it matters." The first guests of the evening began arriving. The usual Saturday night crowd. Couples, celebrating anniversaries, business associates conducting deals over wine that cost more than most people's rent, young professionals trying to impress dates with money they probably didn't have. At 7:55, I saw them through the front windows. Sarah and James walking up the sidewalk, followed by James's parents. Sarah was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month, and she was nervous. I could tell by the way she kept adjusting her purse strap, the same gesture she'd made as a little girl when she was worried about a test or a school presentation. James's father held the door for his wife, the gesture casual and automatic. Old money manners, the kind of courtesy that comes from generations of having doors held for you. "Morrison party," I heard Sarah tell the host. "Table for 5. "Of course. Right this way." I watched Antoine escort them to table 12, the same table where Sarah had told a room full of strangers that her father was too poor to matter. The irony was so perfect it felt orchestrated. They settled into their seats, James's mother commenting on the view, his father nodding approvingly at the wine list. Sarah kept glancing around the dining room like she was looking for something, or someone. "Another water?" Clara asked. "Whiskey," I said. "Something good." She poured 2 fingers of something that probably cost $50 a shot and slid it across the bar. "Liquid courage, liquid honesty." I nursed the whiskey and watched my daughter's table through the mirror behind the bar. They ordered cocktails, studied menus, made small talk that looked effortless from a distance. Sarah laughed at something James said, the sound carrying across the dining room like music. She looked happy, genuinely happy. And for a moment I wondered if I was about to destroy that happiness for the sake of teaching a lesson she might not need to learn. Then I remembered the shame in her voice when she'd called me poor, the relief on her face when she'd finally said what she'd been thinking, the way she'd looked at me like I was her burden, instead of her father. At 8:30, I finished my whiskey and walked to the kitchen. The dinner service was in full swing, controlled chaos that looked like panic but functioned like clockwork. Orders flying, flames leaping, plates assembling with the precision of military operations. "How's table 12? I asked the head chef, a man named Roberto who'd been running the kitchen for 8 years. Ordered the tasting menu, wine pairings, Celebrating something, looks like. The engagement. Ah, Roberto nodded. Special occasion, then. Very special. I found Antoine near the coffee station, reviewing the evening's reservations with one of the servers. He looked up when I approached. How are they doing? Very well, sir. Seemed surprised by the wine selection. The young lady kept asking about prices. Her fiancé assured her it was fine. Of course he did. James Hammond, whose trust fund probably threw off more interest in a month than most people made in a year, telling my daughter not to worry about money. My money, as it happened, since I was paying for the wine she was worried about. When do you usually present the check? After dessert with coffee, unless they request it earlier. I'll present the check for table 12. Antoine's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight pause before he nodded. Of course, sir. And Antoine, when I do, I want you to gather the staff, all of them, in the dining room. Sir, you'll see. By 9:15, they were finishing dessert. I watched Sarah take delicate bites of something that looked like edible art, while James's father held court with a story that had everyone laughing. Normal family dinner. The kind I'd imagined having with Sarah when she was little, and I was planning her future over Saturday morning pancakes. The kind we'd never actually had. I straightened my tie. The red one. The bold one. The one that said I owned this place, and picked up the leather portfolio that contained their check. $2,300 for 5 people. More than I used to make in a month when Sarah was born. Less than I'd paid per minute to buy this restaurant. I walked across the dining room, my footsteps silent on carpet that probably cost more than most people's cars. The other guests continued their conversations, unaware that they were about to witness something that would change everything for the Morrisons. Sarah saw me first. Her expression shifted from confusion to surprise, to something that might have been panic. Dad? She half rose from her chair. What are you doing here? James and his parents turned, their faces reflecting various degrees of surprise and polite confusion. Good evening, I said, nodding to the table. How was everything tonight? It was... Sarah glanced around the table, clearly struggling. It was wonderful. But Dad, what are... you... I'm here to present your check. I set the leather portfolio on the table, right in the center where everyone could see it. James reached for his wallet. That's very kind, Frank, but I've got this. No, I said quietly. You don't. The conversation at nearby tables began to fade as people sensed something happening. I could feel eyes turning toward us, the kind of attention that makes private moments public. Dad, Sarah's voice was tight. Please, let James handle this. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw everything I'd given her and everything I'd failed to give her reflected in her face. Open it, I said. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she lifted the leather cover. Inside, instead of a bill, was a single sheet of paper. Her eyes moved across the text, and I watched the exact moment she understood what she was reading. What? Her voice came out as a whisper. What is this? James leaned over to read over her shoulder. His face went very still. It's a deed of ownership, I said calmly. Filed yesterday with the city. Morrison Hospitality, LLC is now the sole owner of Chez Laurent. The silence that followed was the kind that only happens when 23 people stop breathing at the same time. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. Sarah stared at the ownership papers, her face cycling through expressions I'd never seen before. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief to something that looked like horror. You... She started, then stopped. Tried again. You bought this restaurant? Yesterday afternoon, James's father leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely surprised. The entire restaurant? The business, the equipment, the lease. $23 million cash. The number landed like a physical blow. I watched it register on each face. James's mouth falling slightly open, his mother's wine glass freezing halfway to her lips. His father's eyes narrowing with the sharp focus of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew. But it was Sarah's face that gutted me. The shame I'd seen there last week was gone, replaced by something worse, betrayal. like I'd committed some unforgivable act by existing in a way she hadn't expected. 23 million, she repeated, her voice hollow. You have $23 million. I have $47 million, I said quietly. The restaurant was about half. A woman at the next table gasped audibly. The murmur of conversation that had resumed after the initial shock died away again. We were the evening's entertainment now, whether we wanted to be or not. James found his voice first. Mr. Morrison, I don't understand. You have that kind of money. Why didn't you ever say anything? It was a fair question. An innocent question. The kind of question someone asks when they've never had to choose between dignity and disclosure. Because my daughter was ashamed of me, I said, looking directly at Sarah. Because last Saturday night, she told a table full of people that her father couldn't afford to split a check at Applebee's. Because she needed me to be poor, so she could feel better about marrying rich. Sarah's face went white. Dad, that's not... What would you call it? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. Across the table, James's parents exchanged a look that contained volumes of unspoken communication. Perhaps, James's mother said carefully, we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. I looked around the dining room. Every eye was on us. Servers had stopped moving, pretending to arrange flowers or polish glasses while they listened. The bartender was making drinks with surgical precision, her attention clearly focused on our table. No, I said. This is where it happened. This is where it gets resolved. Sarah finally found her voice. Resolved? Dad, what do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I said last week. But this? She gestured at the papers, at the restaurant around us. This is insane. Is it? You were embarrassed by your poor father. Now you don't have a poor father. Problem solved. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Her voice carried across the dining room, sharper than she'd intended. A few guests actually turned to stare openly now. The pretense of polite disinterest was over. James leaned forward, his lawyer training kicking in. Frank, I think what Sarah's trying to say is that this seems like a rather extreme response to what was essentially a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. I tasted the word like bad wine. Is that what we're calling it? Dad. Sarah's voice was pleading now. You don't understand what it's like. James's family, their friends, the people in our world. They have expectations, standards. I was trying to manage their perceptions so they wouldn't what? Think less. Of you for having a construction worker for a father? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's silence was answer enough. James's father cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, I think perhaps we all made some assumptions last week. Speaking for myself, I certainly didn't intend to make you feel unwelcome. You didn't make me feel unwelcome, I said. You made me feel invisible. There's a difference. The old man's face tightened. He wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by someone he'd dismissed as hired help 20 minutes earlier. And you felt the appropriate response was to purchase a restaurant? I felt the appropriate response was to show my daughter who her father really is. By throwing money around some kind of... He didn't finish the sentence, but I could fill in the blanks. New money. Gauche. Desperate to prove himself. All the things old money whispered about people like me when they thought we couldn't hear. Some kind of what? I asked. James's father had the grace to look uncomfortable. I simply meant that there are more conventional ways to address family disagreements. Conventional. I nodded slowly. What? Having a heart-to-heart over coffee? Writing a letter? Maybe family therapy? Sarah winced. Dad, please. Please what? Please pretend this didn't happen? Please go back to being the embarrassing father you apologize for at dinner parties? I never apologized for you. You apologized for being associated with me. Same thing. The tears started then. Not the pretty kind that happen in movies, but the ugly, shoulder-shaking kind that come from something breaking inside. Sarah buried her face in her hands, and for a moment, she was 8 years old again, crying because the kids at school had made fun of her lunchbox. I'd bought her a new lunchbox the next day. Drove to 3 different stores to find the exact one the other kids had. Never questioned whether it was right or wrong, just fixed the problem. Because that's what fathers do. This felt different. This felt like the kind of problem that couldn't be fixed with a trip to the store. James put his arm around Sarah's shoulders, shooting me a look that was equal parts protective and accusatory. "Mr. Morrison, I think you've made your point." "Have I? What point is that?" "That you're not the man we thought you were." The words were intended as a concession, maybe even an apology, but they hit like an accusation. "No," I said. "I'm exactly the man you thought I was. I'm Frank Morrison. I worked construction for 50 years. I drive a pickup truck and I live in a house I built with my own hands. The only thing that's changed is now you know I'm not poor." Sarah looked up, her makeup streaked, but her eyes fierce. "You lied to me." "I never lied. I let you think what you wanted to think. There's a difference." "Is there?" Her voice was rising again. "Because it feels like you've been lying to me my entire life." The accusation hit harder than I'd expected, not because it was true, but because it contained just enough truth to sting. "Your mother and I decided a long time ago that you didn't need to know about the money. We wanted you to understand the value of work, the importance of earning what you have. We wanted you to respect money instead of expecting it. You wanted me to be ashamed of being poor. You were never poor, Sarah. You just weren't rich. There's a difference." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language, and maybe the language of having enough was so foreign to her generation that she couldn't distinguish it from having nothing. Around us, the restaurant had gone completely quiet. Even the kitchen noise had died down. $23 million buys a lot of things, including the right to have a family breakdown in public. Antoine appeared at my elbow, his expression carefully neutral. "Sir? Is there anything you need?" I looked around the dining room, at the faces pretending not to stare, at the servers frozen with water pitchers and wine bottles, at the woman who was my daughter but felt like a stranger. "Clear the restaurant," I said quietly. "Sir?" "Everyone out. Guests, staff, everyone. Close for the night." Antoine's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, it's only 9:30 on a Saturday night. We have 12 tables still dining and the bar is full. I know what time it is, and I know what I own." Sarah looked up sharply. "Dad, you can't what? Make decisions about my own restaurant?" She started to answer, then stopped, because the truth was, I could. I could close the restaurant, fire the staff, tear down the building if I wanted to. That's what $23 million bought me. The right to make decisions that other people had to live with. The right to be exactly as unreasonable as I wanted to be. Antoine was still standing there, waiting for confirmation that I'd lost my mind. 5 minutes, I told him. Tell everyone they have 5 minutes to finish their drinks and settle their checks, on the house. Dad. Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. You cannot close an entire restaurant because you're having a tantrum. Watch me. And for the first time in 47 years, my daughter looked at me like she was seeing someone she'd never met before. Someone who had the power to turn her world upside down. Someone who just had. The clearing of Chez Laurent took exactly 12 minutes. I watched from table 12 as Antoine orchestrated the exodus with the kind of professional grace that comes from 12 years of managing impossible situations. Guests gathered coats and purses with expressions ranging from confusion to outright indignation. The couple at table 6 demanded to speak to the manager. The business associates at table 3 looked like they were witnessing the collapse of civilization. Antoine handled each complaint with apologetic efficiency, explaining that due to an unexpected family emergency, the restaurant was closing early. Meals were comped, wine was comped, even the coffee was comped. By my rough calculation, I'd just given away about $15,000 in revenue to have a private conversation with my daughter. It was the most expensive family meeting in history. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, watching the chaos unfold around us with the expression of someone who'd just watched a car accident happen in slow motion. James kept checking his phone like he expected a cavalry of lawyers to come charging through the door. His parents sat in rigid silence, their faces carefully neutral in the way that old money people perfect by the time they're 25. The last guest, an elderly woman who'd been nursing a brandy at the bar, finally allowed herself to be escorted out. The front door closed with a soft click that echoed through the empty dining room like a gunshot. We were alone. $23 million of real estate, 5 members of the Morrison and Hammond families, and enough unresolved resentment to power a small city. "Everyone out," I said to the remaining staff. The servers looked to Antoine, who looked to me. I nodded. One by one, they filed toward the employee exit, leaving behind half-cleared tables and the kind of mess that would normally take an hour to clean up. "Sir," Antoine said quietly, "what should I tell them about tomorrow?" "Tell them to come in as usual. We'll be open for Sunday brunch." For nodded and followed the others out, leaving us in a silence so complete I could hear the ice melting in abandoned water glasses. Sarah was the first to speak. "Are you proud of yourself?" Her voice was quiet now, drained of the anger that had carried her through the last hour. She looked exhausted, older, like she'd aged 5 years in the space of a dinner service. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not proud of myself." "Then why did you do it?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since I signed the papers on Friday. Why had I done it? Was it really about respect, or was it about revenge? Was I teaching her a lesson? Or was I just a bitter old man who couldn't handle being embarrassed? "Because I needed you to see me," I said finally. "I see you, Dad. I've always seen you." "No, you haven't. You've seen what you wanted to see. The poor father who needed your protection. The embarrassment you had to manage. The problem you had to solve." James's father leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Morrison, with respect, isn't that exactly what you've done to us tonight? Made us into problems to be solved?" The old man had a point. I'd played the same game they had, just with bigger numbers and higher stakes. "Maybe," I admitted. "But I didn't lie about who I was." "Neither did we," James said quietly. "We told you exactly who we were. We just didn't think to ask who you were." Sarah looked up sharply. "You knew, didn't you? About the money. You've always known." The question was directed at James, but his expression gave him away before he could answer. "I had the firm do a background check," he said reluctantly. "Standard procedure for anyone joining the family. Nothing invasive, just financial basics. You knew." Sarah's voice was flat. "You knew my father had $47 million, and you let me sit here last week and call him poor. I thought you knew too. I thought it was some kind of family thing. Old money families do it all the time. Play down their wealth in public." "Old money families," Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We're not an old money family, James. We're a family with old secrets." She turned to me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something deeper. Disappointment. The kind that comes from realizing the person you thought you knew best in the world had been a stranger all along. "How long?" she asked. "How long what?" "How long have you been rich?" I thought. About it. About the first big contract in 1987 that let us buy the house outright. About the investment properties in the 90s that started generating serious income. About the business sale in 2018 that pushed us into territory I'd never imagined. Depends how you define rich. Don't. Her voice cut like glass. Don't give me semantics. Don't tell me about the difference between rich and comfortable or rich and well off. Just tell me the truth for once in my life. The truth. Such a simple thing to ask for. Such a complicated thing to give. Your mother and I were comfortable by the time you were 10. Well off by the time you were 15. Wealthy by the time you graduated high school. Rich by the time you finished law school. So my entire adult life, you've been rich, and you let me worry about student loans. You let me stress about rent. You let me work 3 jobs through college because I thought we couldn't afford for me not to. Each accusation hit like a physical blow. Because she was right. We could have made her life easier. We could have paid for everything, removed every obstacle, cleared every path. We wanted you to earn it. You wanted me to suffer for it. We wanted you to understand the value of work. You wanted me to be grateful. The words exploded out of her with enough force to rattle the wine glasses. You wanted me to spend my whole life being grateful to you for sacrificing so much when you weren't sacrificing anything at all. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. And the worst part was, she wasn't entirely wrong. There had been pride in watching her struggle and succeed. Pride in seeing her work 3 jobs and still graduate summa cum laude. Pride in knowing that every achievement was earned, not given. But there had also been something else. Something darker. The satisfaction of being needed. Of being the father who sacrificed everything for his daughter's future. Of being essential to her story in a way that money couldn't buy. You're right, I said quietly. The admission seemed to take the wind out of her sails. She sat back in her chair, suddenly looking very young and very tired. About the gratitude. About wanting to be needed. About letting you struggle when I could have made it easier. I looked around the empty restaurant, at the evidence of my wealth scattered across 40 tables. I thought if you knew about the money, you'd stop seeing me as your father and start seeing me as your bank account. So instead, you let me see you as my burden. The words cut deeper than any knife, because that's exactly what I'd done. I'd chosen to be seen as weak rather than risk being seen as unnecessary. I made mistakes, I said. Mistakes, Sarah shook her head slowly. Dad, you lied to me about who you were for 20 years. That's not a mistake. That's a choice you made every single day. James's mother, who'd been silent through most of the conversation, finally spoke. Perhaps, she said carefully. This is a conversation that should happen in private. Family matters are what? I asked. Too messy for polite company? I was going to say too important to be conducted in public. This isn't public. This is my restaurant. And they're going to be your family soon, whether you like it or not. The old woman's face tightened. Mr. Morrison, I understand you're upset. But closing a restaurant, forcing out paying war, customers making a scene, this isn't how reasonable people handle family disagreements. Reasonable people, I repeated. The reasonable people who dismissed me as too poor to matter last Saturday night? No one dismissed you. You called my work honest. That was the best thing you could say about it. I should be grateful for the patronizing praise. James's father cleared his throat. Frank, I think you're reading too much into... Am I? Tell me, what did you think when you met me last week, before you knew about the money? What was your honest assessment of Sarah's father? The silence stretched long enough to be an answer. That's what I thought, I said. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like nails on glass. I can't do this, she said. I can't sit here and watch you destroy everything because your feelings got hurt. Sarah. James started to rise. No. She held up a hand. This is my fault. All of it. I should have defended him last week instead of throwing him under the bus. I should have told you all about his work, his sacrifices, everything he did to give me the life I have. Instead, I was ashamed. I was ashamed of my father, and now he's ashamed of me. She looked at me with eyes that held 20 years of accumulated disappointment. Are you ashamed of me, Dad? The question hit like a physical blow, because the answer was complicated. Because part of me was ashamed, not of who she was, but of who she'd chosen to become. The woman who valued appearance over substance, who chose belonging over loyalty, who traded her father's dignity for social acceptance. But she was still my daughter, still the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during Monday Night Football, still the teenager who called me crying from her dorm room because she missed home, still the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for law school because she thought it was the only way. No, I said. I'm not ashamed of you. I'm disappointed in both of us. She nodded slowly, tears starting again. Good, she said, because I need you to know something before this goes any further. She took a deep breath, and I saw her make a decision that would change everything. I'm calling off the engagement. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. James went very still, his face cycling through expressions I'd never seen before. Confusion, disbelief, something that might have been relief. Sarah, he said, carefully, you don't mean that. I do mean it. She pulled the engagement ring off her finger with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested she'd been thinking about this moment longer than any of us realized. I can't marry into a family that thinks my father is beneath them, and I can't marry someone who knew the truth and let me humiliate myself anyway. She set the ring on the white tablecloth between the water glasses and abandoned dessert plates. The diamond caught the light from the chandelier above, throwing tiny rainbows across the linen like scattered tears. James's mother made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Sarah, please, don't make any hasty decisions. You're upset. We're all upset. But we should pretend this never happened? But we should go back to the way things were, with everyone knowing their place?" The old woman's face went rigid. "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" Sarah looked around the table, her gaze settling on each face before moving on. "You want me to marry your son and spend the rest of my life apologizing for where I came from, making excuses for my father at dinner parties, teaching our children to be ashamed of their grandfather because he worked with his hands instead of inheriting his money?" "Sarah," James said quietly, "that's not fair." "Fair?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What's fair about any of this? What's fair about my father lying to me for 20 years? What's fair about you letting me make a fool of myself when you knew the truth? What's fair about your parents looking at the man who raised me and seeing nothing but hired help?" James's father leaned forward, his lawyer instincts finally kicking in. "Young lady, I think you're being unnecessarily dramatic. No one here has shown anything but respect." "Respect?" Sarah's voice rose sharply. "You called his work honest. That was a consolation prize. You talked about different worlds like he was from another planet. You made it clear that the only reason you tolerated him was because you thought he was harmless. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me, Mr. Hammond, what did you really think when you met my father last week?" The old man's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He'd built a career on having the right words for every situation, but this wasn't a situation they'd covered in law school. "I thought," he said finally, "that he was a man who'd worked hard to give his daughter opportunities he'd never had. And you pitied him for it. I respected him for it." "You pitied him," Sarah repeated, her voice flat with certainty. "You pitied the poor construction worker who'd sacrificed everything to send his daughter to good schools. It made you feel magnanimous to include him in your world. It made you feel generous to overlook his rough edges." James finally found his voice. "Sarah, stop. This isn't helping anyone." "You're right," she said, turning to face him, fully. "This isn't helping. Nothing about this situation is helping. So I'm removing myself from it." She stood up, her movements sharp and decisive. "I'm sorry, James. I'm sorry to your parents. I'm sorry this had to happen this way. But I can't marry someone who sees my family as a problem to be managed. I don't see your family as a problem. You knew my father was wealthy, and you let me call him poor in front of your parents. You let me be ashamed of him when you knew there was nothing to be ashamed of. You treated our relationship like a social experiment. How well could the construction worker's daughter assimilate into proper society?" James's face went white. "That's not. I never thought of it that way. Didn't you?" Sarah picked up her purse, her movements mechanical. "When you introduced me to your friends, did you tell them my father was a successful businessman? Or did you tell them he was blue-collar and salt of the earth? Those were quaint character traits?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I thought so," she said quietly. I'd been silent through most of this exchange, watching my daughter defend me with a ferocity I hadn't seen since she was 8 years old, and getting into playground fights with kids who made fun of my work clothes. But now, watching her throw away her future for the sake of my pride, I felt something break inside my chest. "Sarah," I said, "don't do this." She turned to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Don't stand up for my father? Don't refuse to be ashamed of who I am? Don't throw away your happiness because I was too proud to tell you the truth." "My happiness?" She laughed, but it came out broken. "Dad, do you think I was happy? Do you think I enjoyed spending the last 2 years of my life trying to become someone else? Someone worthy of James's family, someone who belonged in their world. The question hit me like a physical blow, because I'd been so focused on my own wounded pride that I'd missed the obvious truth. My daughter had been suffering too. You seemed happy. I seemed appropriate. There's a difference. James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. We're talking about throwing away 2 years together because of one misunderstanding. 2 years of you being embarrassed by my background. I was never embarrassed by your background. Weren't you? Then why did you have me take diction lessons? Why did you buy me a new wardrobe? Why did you suggest I stop mentioning where I grew up? Each question landed like a slap. James's face cycled through several expressions before settling on something that looked like guilt. I wanted you to be comfortable in my world. You wanted me to disappear into your world. There's a difference. I looked at James. Really looked at him for the first time since this whole mess started. He was a good man, probably. Smart, successful, well-intentioned. But he'd fallen in love with his idea of Sarah, not Sarah herself. He'd fallen in love with the project of improving her, not the reality of accepting her. Just like I'd fallen in love with the project of being needed. She's right, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. She's right, I repeated. About all of it. About you, about me, about this whole situation. James's father bristled. Now see here. No, you see here. I stood up, feeling every one of my 72 years in my back and knees. You want to know what I thought when I met you last week? I thought you were decent people who'd raised a decent son. I thought maybe my daughter had found something real with James. I thought maybe she'd be happy. I looked around the table, at the evidence of wealth and privilege and careful breeding. But you know what I realized tonight? She can't be happy with someone who sees her as a fixer-upper. And James can't be happy with someone who reminds him that not everyone was born into money. That's not fair, James protested. Fair doesn't matter, I said. True matters. And the truth is, you love the idea of Sarah more than you love Sarah herself. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing makeup across her cheek. Dad, and the truth is, I continued, looking directly at my daughter, I've been so afraid of you not needing me that I forgot to let you know me. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. I know you, she said, quietly. You know the version of me I wanted you to know. The struggling father, the man who sacrificed everything, the hero of your origin story. I gestured around the empty restaurant. You don't know the man who could afford to buy this place on a whim because his feelings got hurt. I'm starting to. I looked at the ring sitting on the tablecloth, at the symbol of a future that was dissolving in real time. Are you sure about this? About calling off the engagement? Sarah followed my gaze to the diamond that had, until 10 minutes ago, represented her entire future. I'm sure about not marrying someone who's ashamed of my family. The rest? She shrugged. I'll figure out the rest. James's mother finally found her voice. This is a mistake. You're both making a terrible mistake. Maybe, Sarah said, but it's our mistake to make. She kissed James on the cheek, a gesture so gentle it somehow made everything worse. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really am. Then she walked toward the exit, leaving behind her engagement ring, her fiancé, and the life she'd spent 2 years trying to build. I looked at James and his parents, at the wreckage of their careful plans scattered across the white tablecloth. I should go after her, I said. Should you? James asked bitterly. Seems like you've done enough damage for one night. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had done enough damage. Maybe buying a restaurant to prove a point was the action of a petty, vindictive old man who couldn't handle being embarrassed. Or maybe for the first time in 20 years, I'd shown my daughter who her father really was. Even if it cost us everything. I found Sarah in the parking garage, sitting on the concrete ledge next to her car, still wearing her black dress but looking like she'd aged 10 years in the span of an elevator ride. The engagement ring was in her hand, turning it over and over like a worry stone. Thought you might be here, I said, settling down beside her with the, careful movements of a man whose knees had been protesting for the last decade. Where else would I go? Her voice was hoarse from crying. Can't go home. James has half his stuff there. Can't go to my apartment. I gave it up when we got engaged. Can't go to my friends. They're all James's friends now, too. I looked around the parking garage, at the concrete pillars and fluorescent lights that hummed with the kind of institutional sadness that exists in spaces between other spaces. You could. Come home with me. She looked up sharply. Home? You mean your house? Your house, too. Always has been. Dad, I haven't lived there since college. Doesn't matter. It's still your room. Still has your furniture, your books, those god-awful boy band posters you insisted on keeping through high school. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. They weren't god-awful. They were classics. They were torture devices designed to make fathers question their life choices. She actually laughed then, a sound so unexpected in the concrete echo chamber that it seemed to surprise both of us. Remember when you tried to replace them with that educational periodic table poster? I thought you might develop an interest in chemistry. I developed an interest in hiding the periodic table behind Justin Timberlake. We sat in silence for a moment, sharing the kind of easy memory that felt impossible after everything that had happened upstairs. Dad, she said finally, I need to ask you something and I need you to tell me the truth. Why didn't you tell me? Really, not the stuff about wanting me to understand the value of work. The real reason. I'd been dreading this question all night, because the real answer was more complicated than any explanation I'd given so far. Because I was afraid you'd stop being proud of me. She turned to look at me fully. What do you mean? Your whole life, you've told people about your father who worked construction to put you through school. Your father who sacrificed to give you opportunities. Your father who never took a vacation because every dollar went toward your education. I picked at a piece of concrete that had chipped off the ledge. That's a good story, Sarah. That's the kind of father people respect. And a father who could have paid for everything without blinking? A father who let you struggle because he thought it built character? That's not such a good story. The truth hung between us like a live wire. You were afraid I'd think you were cruel. I was afraid you'd think I was selfish. Because maybe I was. Maybe I liked being the hero of your story too much to give it up. Sarah was quiet for so long, I thought she might not respond. When she did speak, her voice was soft. You want to know what I told people about my father? What? I told them you were the smartest man I'd ever met. I told them you could build anything, fix anything, figure out anything. I told them you read 3 newspapers every morning and knew more about history and politics than most college professors. I told them you taught me to think critically, to question everything, to never accept easy answers. I felt something tighten in my chest. I didn't know you said those things. I also told them you were the kindest man I'd ever met. That you never spoke badly about anyone, never held grudges, never made me feel small even when I deserved it. I told them you were funny and patient, and that you never missed a single school play or soccer game or parent conference in 18 years. Sarah. I told them you were my hero, she said quietly. Not because you were poor, Dad. Because you were good. The words hit harder than any accusation could have. Because they revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had been driving both of us for years. I thought the money would change how you saw me, I said. I thought not having money made me less worthy of James's family. We're quite a pair, aren't we? She laughed again, but this time there were tears in it. A couple of idiots. Speak for yourself. I'm a very expensive idiot. $23 million worth of idiot. 47 million, actually. The restaurant was just the tip of the iceberg. She shook her head. I still can't believe you bought an entire restaurant because you were mad at me. I wasn't mad at you. I was heartbroken. The admission came out before I could stop it, raw and honest in a way that made both of us uncomfortable. Heartbroken? Do you know what it's like to watch your daughter be ashamed of you? To see her choose strangers' approval over her own father's dignity? Sarah's face crumpled. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I said those things. I'm sorry I made you feel small. I'm sorry I chose fitting in over standing up for you. And I'm sorry I lied to you for 20 years. I'm sorry I let you think we were struggling when we weren't. I'm sorry I valued being needed more than being honest. We sat there crying in a parking garage that smelled like exhaust and broken dreams. Two people who'd loved each other wrong for so long they'd forgotten how to love each other right. What do we do now? Sarah asked finally. I thought about it. About the restaurant upstairs that I'd bought in a fit of wounded pride. About the Hammonds, probably still sitting at table 12 wondering what had just happened to their carefully ordered world. About James, who'd lost his fiancée because he'd never bothered to see her clearly. We figure it out as we go, I said. We should have been doing all along. And the restaurant? I looked up at the ceiling, toward the 40 floors of glass and steel that rose above us. I guess I'm in the restaurant business now. Are you going to keep it? For a while. Maybe hire some people who understand the difference between honest work and charity cases. Maybe try to run a place where everyone feels welcome. That sounds expensive. I can afford it. Sarah smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her all night. There might be a silver lining to all this. What's that? James's parents are probably having the worst night of their lives right now. They just discovered they were snobby to a multi-millionaire, probably wondering if they can salvage the relationship by pretending tonight never happened, probably offering James marriage counseling and suggesting he should apologize for not telling them about your background check. We both started laughing then, the kind of slightly hysterical laughter that comes after too much emotion and too many revelations. You realize, I said when we'd both caught our breath, this is going to be all over the society pages by tomorrow morning. Good. Maybe it'll teach some people not to make assumptions about strangers. Or maybe it'll just confirm that new money has no class. Probably both. I stood up, my knees protesting the concrete and the hour. Come on. Let's go home, she repeated like she was testing the word. Home. Where you can raid the refrigerator and complain about the thermostat and remind me why I was smart not to have more children. Dad? Yeah. I love you. Not because you're rich, not because you're poor, not because you sacrificed or didn't sacrifice, just because you're my father. I felt something loosen in my chest, some knot of fear and resentment and wounded pride that had been tightening for years. I love you, too, kiddo, even when you're being an idiot. Even when I'm being a very expensive idiot? Especially then. We walked toward our cars, two people who'd finally figured out how to see each other clearly. It wasn't the ending either of us had planned, but it was honest, and after 20 years of careful editing, honest felt like enough. Behind us, Chez Laurent rose into the night sky, 40 floors of glass and steel and expensive lessons. Tomorrow I'd have to figure out how to run a taco restaurant. Tonight I just had to figure out how to be Sarah's father. It was the easier job and the harder one, but it was mine.